I put on my best dress and chose the highest heels that I can afford right now. Christmas is in 2 weeks, and the weather is spoiling us only with slippery sidewalks and fog. I got out of the taxi and ran to the hotel entrance when I accidentally noticed him, my son-in-law, who was hugging the waist of a blonde in a red dress who did not look at all like his pregnant wife, who was suffering from toxicosis at home at that time. I forgot about the presentation. I hid behind a row of neatly parked cars and could not believe my eyes. He was cheating on the woman he had kissed in our kitchen that morning. They entered the hotel like a couple in love. I followed them to the elevator. I wanted to get a closer look at his mistress. I was shocked because I recognized her as my daughter Samantha's friend. Name's Roselyn Rosie if you've earned it, ma'am if you haven't. 61, knees that predict rain better than the local weatherman, and a spine that's carried more disappointments than my dry cleaner has carried winter coats. And tonight, in the velvet lobby of the Belgrave Hotel, I learned my son-in-law has the survival instincts of a moth and the morals of a coupon scam. I stood there in my coat like a lamppost with lipstick, the blue carpeting swallowing the click of my heels as the elevator doors closed on the two of them. Ethan's wedding-banded hand splayed on the small of a woman I knew too well. Zara, Samantha's friend since college. The girl who brought vegan cupcakes to my daughter's baby shower and asked for a tour of the nursery like she was measuring for drapes. The concierge asked if I needed assistance. I needed a fire hose and a priest. No, thank you, I said, and pressed the elevator button with a steady finger that lied about the tremor running through the rest of me. On the 7th floor, the hallway smelled of lilies and expensive secrets. I didn't plan anything. I moved on instinct, the way a mother fox moves when she hears a trap click. I kept 20 paces back, enough that my perfume wouldn't give me away, and saw them pause at 714. Ethan lifted the do not disturb sign with 2 fingers like it was a promise he understood. He looked left, then right. He didn't look behind him. Men like him don't believe in rearview mirrors. They slipped into the room. I stood staring at that door number until the carpet pattern started pulsing. My daughter was home in Queens, nauseated and radiant in the lopsided way pregnancy makes a woman. She'd sent me a photo an hour earlier, her swollen ankles and fuzzy socks resting on a pillow. The caption, "Little pirate kicking again." Ethan had kissed her forehead this morning in my kitchen, told me he'd be late at work, big pitch, wish me luck. Mom. He'd started calling me Mom last spring. It felt warm then. It feels borrowed now, like he took it without checking the label. I didn't knock. You don't knock on a grenade. I walked back to the elevator, then past it, found a women's room with enough guilt to blind a bishop, and sat on a lounge chair designed for queens and breakdowns. I took out my phone. I took one breath. I took another. Then I did not call Samantha. I'm not squeamish about confrontation, but this wasn't confrontation. This was triage. My girl was 8 months along, the baby measuring big, blood pressure flirting with trouble. News like this lands not on the ears but on the uterus. So I texted Ethan instead. Me. Are you still at work? The screen thought about it, as if calculating how much oxygen to steal from me. Then Ethan. Yep, late night, big deck due tomorrow. Kiss Sam for me. I stared at that exclamation point until I could hear it ringing. I typed and erased. Then I put my phone away and washed my hands, though I hadn't touched anything. It's an old habit. When I feel helpless, I scrub. I left the hotel bathroom with my lips pressed into a line that could cut glass. My favorite writer, the reason I'd come downtown at all, was supposed to be reading from her new book in the Roosevelt room. I had imagined a night that would fill me up with language and possibility. Instead, I had a new plot line, and it was uglier, and it belonged to me. In the lobby, a garland sagged elegantly under the weight of gold ornaments. I took one look at my reflection in the mirrored column, chin lifted like I'd been balancing books since Eisenhower, and said to it, Roselyn, either you're the heroine or you're the warning. Pick. I picked. First, I walked back outside into the mist. New York in fog looks like it's keeping secrets for a living. I pulled my coat tight and found a bench under an iron tree not brave enough for leaves. From there, I could see the revolving door spit out late arrivals in shiny shoes. I waited. 26 minutes later, he came out alone. His tie was looser. His face was smug the way faces get when they think sin is cardio. He hailed a cab. I hailed mine. Follow that one, I told my driver, and he grinned in the rearview like I had just made his night. Where to? He asked. Justice, I said. But Midtown will do for now. We trailed Ethan across town to a brownstone on East 63rd I didn't recognize. He didn't get out. He texted, waited, drove on. Clever, or cowardly. With men it's so often the same thing. He eventually stopped at a corner bar where wood panels make liars look sincere. I watched through the window as he ordered a drink and practiced an innocent expression. He had it almost right. I took a photo, then another. Then I slid out of the cab, walked in, and took the stool next to him like I'd been doing it all my life. Long day? I said. He half turned, smile primed, and froze. For a half second, he looked like a boy caught stealing communion wine. Then he kissed the air near my cheek and said, "Rosie, what a surprise." "I'm just working late?" I asked. I ran a finger along the rim of my water glass. "At the Belgrave?" He blinked slow. "Belgrave? No. I've been at the office." "Why?" I laid my phone on the bar, face up. A single photo, his hand on Zara's waist in the lobby, the hotel logo glittering over his shoulder like a witness. He didn't pick up the phone. He picked up his glass. "That's not me," he said. "Men who marry into my family should learn to things quickly," I said. "We cook with butter, and we keep receipts." "Rosie," he said softly, tilting his head the way a negotiator does when he's about to devalue your reality. "You're under a lot of stress. Samantha's pregnancy has been hard on you too. You've always been protective. I love that about you. But you're mistaken. Gaslighting always tasted like hotel soap to me, cheap, perfumed, and it stings when it gets in your mouth." I took my phone back. "I saw you," I said, not louder, just deeper. "I followed you. I know who she is." He smiled then, not at me, but at his reflection in the bar mirror. "Zara's a client," he lied, quickly and beautifully. "She's part of the pitch team for a partnership. Sam knows. We hugged because, well, we're friends." I shouldn't have. You're right, that looks bad. But it's nothing. I could have cornered him. I could have said the room number and watched his throat jump. But I thought of Samantha in those fuzzy socks, and I decided pacing would matter more than punching. "You'll come by tonight," I said. "You'll kiss your wife's forehead again and you'll hold her hand while she falls asleep. And you will not ask her for money again this week. Do you hear me, Ethan?" The flinch was microscopic, but visible like a lab mouse hearing the scientist open a drawer. "Money?" he said. "Don't insult me twice in the same sentence." I stood. "And tell Zara she left her dignity in the Belgrave elevator. I'll send it to her if I find it." I left him with the check, a small tax for breathing my air. On the ride home, the city's lights smeared into constellations I didn't recognize. I looked out at the great and different towers and felt the kind of clarity that arrives the second after you realize the bridge is out. I could not tell Samantha. Not yet. To protect her meant to act, and to act meant to know more than I knew. I have lived long enough to learn that fury is a rocket fuel, and without steering, it just burns you up in place. So I made a plan, right there in the back of that cab, with the smell of rubber and winter coats pressing in. I would watch, I would listen, and I would let Ethan underestimate me. Men like him always do. They put you in the mom box and forget you ever had teeth. For the next week, I became the benevolent ghost of their marriage. I dropped off casserole and picked up whispers. I accidentally watered the ficus and checked the call logs on the kitchen iPad they never bothered to sign out of. I brought ginger candies for Sam's nausea and stored away every question Ethan asked about accounts and investments. He had a new venture, he said one night, eyes bright with the fervor people get when they've confused a spreadsheet with destiny. "Just a bridge loan. Just a small infusion. We'd be on the ground floor," he murmured, thumb drawing circles on my daughter's palm. "It's us investing in our family's future." I smiled a smile I learned from grandmothers, the kind that looks warm and says I was born before you and I'll be here after you. "Future's a patient thing, honey," I said. "It doesn't mind waiting for proof." He laughed, and I watched the laugh not touch his eyes. On Thursday, I called Samantha's obstetrician behind her back. "Yes, I am that mother." I asked polite questions and got the kind of professional answers that say everything between the lines. Rest is not a suggestion, stress is a toxin, and our baby needs time, not drama. I hung up and unpacked the little brass box my own mother left me, a small thing filled with smaller things, a paperclip, a safety pin, a wisdom tooth, a library card long expired. Her life had fit in symbols. Mine would fit in actions. Friday afternoon, the fog lifted and left behind a city that looked like it had been polished by gossip. I was on my way to meet my friend Lillian at the tea place she likes, the one with butter cookies and a piano player who thinks he's Cole Porter. I turned onto Lexington and saw it, Ethan's car. His precious graphite coupe with the vanity plate he thinks is subtle, parked outside the Orpheum Hotel, which has rooms named after Greek tragedies because the universe has a sense of humor. I walked right past, then doubled back, then did something I will not apologize for, because apology is for wrongs, and this was a right. I opened the passenger door. He keeps it unlocked. Men like him believe locks are for other people. I climbed in and sank down, my knees, yelping but cooperative, and pulled his gym bag over me like a nylon blanket. I smelled eucalyptus and ego. I waited. Time passed in the big, dramatic way it passes when you are hiding in a car that belongs to someone who thinks you don't know how keys work. My phone buzzed. Lillian. I silenced it. The piano player would have to impress other women today. The driver's door opened. Ethan fell into the seat, laughter already on his breath. A new voice followed, high and syruped, not Zara's. I love that you picked me up yourself, she cooed. Feels real. Real is what we make it, babe, Ethan said, and I watched the silhouette of his hand slide to a thigh that wasn't my daughter's. He started the engine but didn't pull out. The car was our confessional booth. I told you my wife's family is loaded, he said. Old money, new money, every kind of money. They think I'm their golden retriever with an MBA. They pat me on the head and throw me stock options. Do they know about me? She asked. They know what I tell them, he said. He sounded proud of that sentence, like he'd built something. Her mother's convinced I'm having a fling with her darling Samantha's friend. I introduced them years ago for exactly this reason. Families like theirs collapse from the inside if you loosen the right bolts. Once they start fighting mother against daughter, father against everyone, it all gets easy. The car went silent except for the quiet tick of the indicator. He wasn't using. I felt my heartbeat in my throat, then traveled down my arms until even my fingers pulsed. He kept talking. Some men can't resist their own voice. It's their favorite white noise. Only obstacle, he said. And then he laughed low. Her mother. She's got a nose for trouble and a mean backhand when you serve her a lie. I'm working on it. People can be encouraged to doubt their minds. I've nearly got Samantha convinced her mother's unwell paranoia, stress. A few sleepless nights, a few specialties, he chuckled. When the baby comes, she'll need rest. Her mother will make a scene. The doctors will cozy up with diagnoses. Once she's out of the way for a spell, I'll help her husband manage the business side of being rich. Her father loves me already. Promise me another 20% when the grandson arrives. Imagine how generous he'll feel when I save the day. Something inside me, something I had thought was iron, melted and then reforged sharper. The mistress giggled, a sound like glass wind chimes. You're wicked, she said, but she said it like a compliment. What about the blonde from last week? Zara? She's a prop. You're the show, he said, and the car filled with the carbon monoxide of his charm. I didn't breathe for a long moment. I didn't move at all. You think you know what betrayal feels like until you hear it plotted in high definition 6 inches from your kneecaps. You think you've lost your capacity for shock and then you realize you've only misplaced it. They finally pulled out, still talking, and I slid lower, counting stoplights by the sway of the bag's zipper. My plan shifted under my ribs, rearranging itself to fit this new terrain. This wasn't just infidelity. This was siege. This was a man who'd studied us like a bridge he intended to burn after collecting the tolls. He dropped her off, no kisses, no lingering. He saved ceremony for the innocent and then he pulled into a garage near our neighborhood. He left the car. I uncurled like a paperclip, crawled across the seat, and got out without being seen, because 61 doesn't mean slow, it means practiced. At home, I walked straight to my bedroom and shut the door. My husband Thomas looked up from his ledger, glasses perched low on his nose. He loves that boy like a second son. I love that about him, and I hate it tonight. Rosie, he said, smiling. How was your author thing? He didn't see my face yet. He didn't see the new map. It was illuminating, I said, toeing my shoes off like I was removing small animals that had attached themselves. I sat on the bed, told myself to speak plainly. Then I didn't, because to say it now would be to set fire to a room with a sleeping woman inside. Thomas, I said instead, did Ethan talk to you about investments? He brightened. My husband has the soul of a builder. He sees potential like other men see sunsets. He has some interesting ideas, actually, he said. A little aggressive, but the kid's hungry. Promise me something, I said. Promise me you won't transfer anything without me in the room. Not $1. Not until after the baby comes. He laughed lightly. Rosie, come on. You don't even like to log into the brokerage account. You get hives from Excel. I get hives from termites, I said, steady. And I smell wood dust. He frowned then, confused by the metaphor, and I kissed him on the temple. You married a poet by accident, I said. It keeps life interesting. That night I stared at the ceiling longer than I stared at my husband the first time he took off his tuxedo, and that was a long time. I counted backwards from 1,000 the way my mother taught me when the house creaked with bad news. When the numbers were thin, I got up, made tea, and wrote. I wrote a timeline, a map of names, a list of passwords I'd never cared to memorize until caring meant survival. I wrote down every time Ethan had mentioned liquidity, every time he'd changed the subject when Samantha asked about the nursery budget. I wrote the phrase specialties and underlined it twice so hard my pen nearly bruised the table. In the morning, I went to Samantha's. I made her oatmeal the way she likes it with brown sugar and the kind of cinnamon that insists upon itself. I told her I'd be staying a few nights just because I feel like nesting. She laughed at me and called me ridiculous and told me she loved me in that distracted, grateful way a woman loves the person who peels her oranges when she's too tired to do it herself. I washed her mugs and accidentally dropped the infuser Ethan had brought into the trash. I bought a new kettle and said the old one was whistling off key. I took the dog for long walks and checked every shadow for a hand I didn't like. I pretended not to see the way Ethan watched the mail like a raccoon. I watched him back. On Sunday, I asked Samantha for a small favor. Sweetheart, could you show me your accounts? She blinked, surprised. We've never been a family that talked numbers with each other. We talked recipes and politics when we felt brave. But she shrugged and opened her banking app. He'd been trying. I could see the attempts, gentle, plausible requests for her to move this, sign that, transfer here for returns. Don't sign anything, I said, gentle as lavender. Not until the baby's here. Call it superstition. Humor your mother. She smiled indulgently and nodded. In that nod was the entire staircase of our history, step by step my rules that made no sense at 13, my rules that saved her at 17, my rules she now teaches to her students because that apple is rocking proudly near the trunk. That afternoon, I printed the photo from the hotel and slid it into an envelope. I wrote Samantha on the front, then added later in my own handwriting, I love you more than my pride. Forgive me for what I'm about to do. Because I knew this, truth has a price, and it always demands payment in advance. And I was about to lay it all on the counter. I called Ethan from the hallway, where the light knows us and has for years. Come by, I said. We need to talk. He arrived with flowers like this was a play and he'd read the stage directions. My husband greeted him like a man greets a man he trusts. I watched those two smile at each other and felt my jaw set the way it had the day I drove through an ice storm to stop a foreclosure. You can love and you can fight in the same breath. Women do it every day. We sat. I placed the envelope on the coffee table between us like a bomb I hoped he'd defuse by confessing. He smiled the way he smiles when he wants alone. Rosie, he said, if this is about those silly rumors, open it. I said. He did. He looked at the photo. He didn't blink. He leaned back and delivered his line perfectly. That's not me, he said again, tender as a lullaby. I wasn't there. I love Samantha. I don't look at other women. Thomas shifted, hurt cutting across his face like wind. Rosie, he said softly, maybe stop. I told my husband without looking at him. I kept my eyes on Ethan, the way you keep your eyes on a backyard fire that thinks it's charming. You're lying, I said to him, and you're sloppy. He put the photo back in the envelope and slid it across the table as if playing a friendly hand of cards. You're tired, he said. You're worried. The baby, I'm lucid, I countered. And I'm done giving you the benefit of the doubt you bought with charm and dimples. His face hardened for a flicker, then softened again like dough. I'm going to pretend you didn't say that, he murmured. For Samantha's sake. For Samantha's sake, I said, standing. I will burn down every lie you've built and dance in the ashes. He laughed then, a little, because men like him trust that we won't follow through. They think we'll tire, or forgive, or die. They forget that we've been running marathons in heels since our grandmothers were victory curls. He left. Thomas watched him go, then turned to me, eyes troubled. Rosie, he said, he's a good boy. Bless your heart, I said, and in my mouth it wasn't a southern nicety. It was a battle hymn. He's a boy. Good is up for debate. I slept badly, dreamt of elevators that only went down. In the morning, The world woke up and asked for coffee like nothing had happened. Samantha texted to say she was tired, that Ethan had made her tea and she felt fuzzy after, that the dog had gotten out somehow and she couldn't find him. My fingers started to shake. I wrote back, "I'm on my way," and as I grabbed my keys, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a package, no return address, my name in block letters. Inside, a small bottle of loose leaf tea and a note typed, "For calm, brew long." I held the bottle up to the light and watched tiny green knives glint in the glass. I set it down carefully, like it might bite, and grabbed my coat. Outside, the fog had returned, thicker, closer, as if the city had drawn a veil over its face. I walked into it with my chin up, my plan gathering itself like a storm that finally remembers its name, because if Ethan wanted to make me crazy, he was about to learn what I become when I stopped trying to be sane for other people. And if he wanted a war, he'd picked a woman who knows where the old weapons are kept. When the package sat on my kitchen table like an accusatory ornament, I felt the old familiar hum that comes before action, not anger exactly, more like the steady click of a well-oiled lock. I did not drink the tea. I didn't even open it in the house. I wrapped it in a dish towel my mother used to save for greasy pans and slipped it into the bottom of the trash bin on the side porch where raccoons, not husbands, find secrets. Then I called Lillian. "Lils," I said when she picked up, "you still play detective for your friends on Sunday afternoons, or have you gone full yoga?" "Rosie?" Lillian's voice was unfailingly cheerful, the kind of bright that can peal like a bell over bad news. "What on earth? Bring your big hat and your sharper tongue. I'll make coffee and we'll talk about men who think they're clever." She was at my door in 20 minutes with a tartan scarf and a casserole dish large enough to feed the Russian ballet. Lillian is the only one I know who treats gossip like a spreadsheet, organized, annotated, and terrifyingly efficient. We sat, we drank, she listened, and then she narrowed her eyes the way she does when she's about to recommend soap. "You're not alone," she said. "You know Sandra? She once told me about a guy who, what's his name again?" "Ethan," I said. The name tasted like a staple. "Right, Ethan. He's slippery," Lillian decided. "Not the kind you grab with a net, the kind you outflank. You need witnesses and you need paper." "We have one photo," I said. "We need more," she said, already buttoning her coat. "I'll drive." While Lillian combed through the neighborhood like a woman on a scavenger hunt, I did what I'd learned to do in crises. I cataloged receipts, times, innocuous texts that read like lullabies, names that repeated like drumbeats. I made copies of the hotel photo, watermarked them with the word proof in big red letters like an old-fashioned stamp. I mailed one to myself, because there is something satisfying about receiving evidence in your own mailbox. It smells less like accusation and more like ownership. Being 61 gives you certain advantages in espionage. People underestimate you. They think middleware wisdom is all you have left. They forget that your knees are the product of 37 years of getting up after falling, and your brain is the file cabinet of a woman who remembers birthdays, betrayals, and how to open a safe. That evening, I decided to test a theory. If Ethan was playing a long con, he might speak plainly to the wrong people. Men like him talk in a lowering voice to mistresses. They brag to their valet. They expose their plans in bars where the bartender takes notes and freeloaders talk too much. So I sat in the Orpheum Cigar Lounge. Don't ask. I do not smoke. I like the acoustics, and watched. It took 3 minutes for him to walk in, like he had a GPS that always led him back to the smell of other women. He chose a shadowed booth and, as men with something to hide do, tried to make himself small. He failed. Sloppiness leaks. He was with Zara that night, the blonde from the Belgrave, still wearing her moral ambiguity like a shawl, but he was not alone for long. A younger woman slipped in, all lacquered nails and too bright perfume, and they all bent over a tablet like conspirators. I took a photo again, for good measure. Pictures are stubborn things. A week later, the dog disappeared. No, that's not melodrama. That's a crime that lands in the soft place of a pregnant woman's routine. Teddy, Samantha's mutt half-terrier, half-guardian angel, went missing during one of Ethan's work lunches. Samantha panicked. I panicked, which is different because mine is the organized sort. We called shelters, posted flyers with Teddy's over-enthusiastic ears on them, and I watched my daughter unravel like a sweater someone had tugged at too hard. The timing was a stitch in the pattern. The day Teddy vanished, Ethan had suggested Samantha call her OB and let the doctors check out the anxiety. He floated the idea like an angel with a financial ledger. a small worry now to secure a bigger reward later. She was dizzy, he said. Maybe a pill, maybe rest. Nothing to worry about, love, he murmured while plying her with chamomile. He calls everything a plan that benefits him. A woman who loses her dog expects neighbors to look for it. A woman who's being gaslit loses more than a dog. She loses confidence, the kind that anchors decisions. I could see it in Samantha's eyes as she scrolled through message threads, seeking the dog and finding words like transfer and invest instead. Ethan had been trying to get her to move funds. He'd argue patiently that the deal required liquidity and faith. Faith is amorphous. Liquidity is a bank account away from being someone else's asset. I did something that would make certain people furious and certain mothers very proud. I took the lead. I called Thomas. I didn't beg. I told him the facts as I knew them, leaving out the tone that sometimes makes men think they're the calmer species. Ethan's been seen with multiple women, Tom. He's talking about moving money. He's been talking about encouraging a diagnosis. And Teddy's gone. There was silence on the other end that felt like the first cold winter morning after you've left your gloves inside. Rosie, he said finally, are you sure? I could hear him doing the math in his head, the weight of a boy he loved balanced against the weight of a company he built. It's a delicate calculus, and men like Thomas are bad at subtracting sentiment. I'm sure enough, I said. Please just don't sign any papers with him until we check his references, he promised. The promise sat between us like a fragile heirloom. I could hear him pacing. He loves Ethan the way a father loves a prodigal who brings good quarterly reports. My job was to make the prodigal look like a viper before the report ruined everything. That night, Samantha's panic bloomed into a hospital visit. She called, voice thin. Mom, I can't find Teddy. I'm dizzy and the tea Ethan made tea yesterday and I felt weird. I can't. Her sentences broke like brittle twigs. Go in, I said. Call the OB. Go now. I'm coming. I drove like a woman with two engines. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and cotton and the sort of hope that arrives on squeaky shoes. Samantha was pale, hair braided like a nervous crown, clutching a pillow like a life raft. The nurse was kind in a practiced way. They checked her vitals and asked the questions you ask when you suspect a mind is being undermined. Any new supplements? Any recent stressors? Any unusual foods or drinks? Samantha hesitated. She looked at me as if shelter were a person. He brewed some special tea for me, she whispered. He said it was calming. My hand closed around her fingers. Did you keep any of it? She shook her head. I felt my stomach drop into a place where old grief sits comfortably and gnaws. Did he ever mention anyone named? I started, and she cut me off with a look that said she loved me and trusted me and also needed her mother the way a child needs a flashlight in a cave. The OB ordered tests, put her on a monitor, and explained in patient, professional sentences that were both comforting and infuriating. Anxiety and dehydration can mimic worse things. They gave Samantha fluids and asked us to stay. I watched my daughter sleep in that hospital bed and thought, if this is what he wanted, it's working, swirling the world until the edges blur and the person in the center thinks they're the problem. While she slept, I called my brother, Jack. He's a man who used to fix tractors and now fixes inconvenient truths. He's also allergic to polite deception. Rosie, he said when he answered, what's wrong? I told him everything I could say without swelling to hysteria. He cursed, a sound both tender and furious. Bring me something solid. I'll come in the morning. And don't take any tea from any attractive men pretending to be calm. He arrived with work boots and an honest face. Jack has always been the sort of man who resolves things with hands, not speeches. He listened to my timeline, nodded as if assembling a chair, and then said 3 words that made me weep with gratitude and rage. I'll handle Ethan. We made plans. Nothing dramatic yet. Surveillance, contact checks, background. Jack owes a favor to a classmate from police academy who now wears a badge and remembers faces. I sent an anonymous tip to that classmate, James Carter, who'd once been a boy in our town with ink-stained fingers and a stubborn jaw. He called back within the hour and said something that made my scalp prickle with cold satisfaction. Rosie, I've smelled this kind of con before. He marries into money, cajoles his way into control, then disappears with artifacts called investments. We've got a name for them, marriage burglars. Could you run a check discreetly? I asked, my voice low. Already on it. Don't touch anything. I'll call you when I know more. The call that came an hour later was not the one I wanted. It was worse. Rosie, James said, voice suddenly sharp. You need to be careful. Ethan's been on some lists. Not criminal lists. Exactly, more like rumors. He's got a pattern of women and quick marriages. Also, this is odd, there's someone in his past who might like to reappear. Who? I said. There was a pause. A man named Halvorsen. He's been involved in, well, keep your doors locked. Halvorsen. The name sounded like a shipwreck. It matched the bit of story I'd been nursing in the back of my head, a piece of Samantha's childhood that closed like a trapdoor every time I mentioned it. Halvorsen was Sam's stepfather, a man who left a long, ugly footprint on a girl who once trusted too easily. Sam had buried that chapter because survival does not always allow for excavation. I felt memory turn to a weapon. If Ethan intended to bring Halvorsen back into Samantha's orbit, if he intended to pull ghosts from the mud and parade them like exhibits, then he wasn't just playing at love. He was waging chemical warfare on the family's cohesion. That night, a video arrived in my inbox. No sender, no flourish. Just a clip of Teddy barking behind a paper bag. Then the camera panning to a shot of Halvorsen's face in the background, older, yes, but with the same bad light around him. The caption read, "He's back. Miss him?" My chest tightened in a way that felt like someone turning a key on my ribcage. The video was not a threat so much as an invitation for Samantha, for me, for the household to recall the things we'd carefully shelved. I forwarded the clip to James and to Jack. I made copies and shoved them into a folder labeled evidence. I put the folder on the table in front of me like a talisman, and then, for the first time since this whole calamity began, I let myself be furious without apology. Let's make him miscalculate, Jack said, setting down his coffee. Make him think he's ahead, then pull the rug. How? I asked. Because plotting is different from doing, and I have a lifetime of doing. Jack looked at me the way he looked at broken engines. We get proof. We get the dog back. We make sure Samantha's safe. Then we show the world the man for what he is. And if they won't believe us? I asked, because that was the thorn. People rarely believed old women until the bank account was empty and the conservator's letter arrived. Then we make them believe, he said. The next morning, I woke with a plan taste on my tongue. Plans are like bread, better when warm and baked with intention. I had amassed allies, Lillian with her gossip spreadsheet, Jack with his boots, James with his badge. I had motives, love, protection, legacy. I had a stubbornness older than Ethan's haircut. I also had a secret drawer of small things my mother left me, an old film camera, a key, and a little leather-bound notebook. I took them all out and began to write, because the best stories save themselves. I wrote down every time Ethan smiled at my husband in a way that asked for more, every time he suggested consolidating funds, every time he left the room when a subject became inconvenient. If he wanted to tear our family down from the inside, he would have to learn about brickwork. We would build message by message, proof by proof, until his scaffolding fell. That night, as I set the camera on the windowsill to catch the stoop in case strangers came calling, my phone lit up with an unknown number. The image that flashed on the screen before I answered was of Teddy, panting softly, a smudge of mud on his snout. The voice on the other end was soft and a little cruel. You can't stop progress, Roselyn, it said. You're only making noise. Noise weakens minds. Let it go. I swallowed. Who is this? Silence. Then a man's laugh like a match being struck. You know me. The line went dead. I sat in the dark, listening to the apartment breathe. Outside, some drunk on the street laughed too. Inside, my house hummed with the soft machinery of our lives. Babies make a lot of noise. Secrets make more. I turned the camera on myself and spoke into the lens, a woman making a record for the future. If they expect me to go quietly, they didn't know what they were choosing. They should have checked the label. Then I closed the curtains and prepared for the morning, when men would meet their reckoning and mothers would do what mothers do best, stand between a child and the world and refuse to move. When you decide to pick a fight with a man who has learned to wear other people's trust like tuxedos, you have to be as patient as a cat watching a can opener. We were patient. We were also mercilessly practical. Jack and James ran the map like two generals swapping chess pieces. James quiet, methodical, a man who kept his badge like a bookmark in his life, had pulled up files, old addresses, and a string of little marriages that ended the same way, a rapid consolidation of assets, a polite bankruptcy, a relocation. He called Ethan a professional husband in a voice that had lost the novelty of saying it. Jack called him a rat and then set to work. But the immediate, pressing thing was Teddy. You watch the people you love shrink when something as ordinary as a dog disappears. Samantha's panic felt like a weather front. It arrived with foghorns and made rational thought soggy. We needed the dog back, not only because Teddy was Teddy, but because getting him back would be proof that someone was moving in our lives like a hand in a dark pocket. We set a trap that was, by design, unromantic and absolutely ruthless. I created an online listing older terrier, rehoming due to relocation, free to a good home, and used a photo of Teddy when his fur was less ironic. Lillian wrote the ad copy like a poet who also knew how to bait a hook. James and Jack arranged to be respondents to the ad. Jack posed as a potential adopter with an empty-voiced heart, James as a helpful neighbor. Ethan likes to make his own arrangements, but he also likes people who make him feel needed, he answered. The meeting was in a small municipal park, the kind that smells like the city's undercare and late fall clippings. I sat on a bench in a coat that was too sensible for the moment and watched the movers move. Jack stood 2 rows of benches away, hands in his coat pockets, eyes like steel wool. James hung where lawmen hang, close enough to react, far enough not to scare. A young man arrived, shoulders too narrow for the weight he carried, and he dragged behind him a crate that rattled. The dog barked in muffled protest, my Teddy's voice, so unmistakable it made my chest unclench. I nearly laughed in the public square. When the crate opened, Teddy burst out like a sun that had been kept in a jar. He saw me and his body became a punctuation mark, tail a metronome, tongue a sloppy punctuation. I ran to him like a fool and he threw himself into my knees with the dramatic affection only a dog can manage. The man with the crate tried to explain, voice oily. I found him wandering, ma'am. Found him near Save It, I said, because I was being very careful with my words so the words would be useful later. Where did you find him? Who gave him to you? He started to name a street, then hesitated. That's when Jack stepped forward and clipped the story neatly with a question no one can lie through. Cell phone. Show me the messages where someone asked you to pick up the dog. The man fumbled, and his fingers betrayed him the way they always do, as if his brain were still searching for an alibi in a language his mouth didn't speak. He handed over his phone. It took James 3 minutes of work to find the thread, a string of messages from an unlisted number, coordinates to the orphan dog, and in one message, a suggestive price for the return. We had a name and we had a pawn. The number traced back to a burner service that led to a rent-a-room complex in a part of town that smelled of fried food and regret. James wrote it down and then looked at me like he was measuring how much I could carry. You did good, he said, as if there's such a thing as gentle praise for people in a war. Back in the car, Teddy slept on my lap like an exhausted general. We had our first solid thing. The dog was with someone who'd been instructed to make him vanish. It's not the same as a confession, but it's an alleyway you can walk into and maybe find the man who sent them there. We went to the address. The building was a narrow thing that leaned like it was shy of better neighborhoods. I walked in with Jack and James and Lillian, my entourage or posse or barricade. I felt ridiculous and holy in the same breath. We found the room where they'd been asked to stash Teddy. It smelled faintly of laundry detergent and cheap cologne. On the table were tea tins shaped like optimism and a pile of postcards with cityscapes on them, little lies that travel for free. There were also receipts, and receipts are the devil's autograph. James fingered one, a cafe on the Upper East Side, a valet ticket, a photo receipt from the Belgrave, and a lunch tab with a signature that matched Ethan's handwriting, his little looping E that always tried to be artful. It was enough to tie him to the action in a way his smooth talk couldn't erase. We made copies, left the room with Teddy still in my arms, and drove back to Samantha's. I am ashamed to say the moment I walked through the door and saw Samantha's face pale, raw, and somewhere a step away from being hollow, I cried. Teddy jumped into her lap like he'd been holding an audition and knew the lines. She sobbed into his fur. Her phone lit up with messages from Ethan, mostly asking if she'd had lunch, if she felt better, and one, more urgent one, asking her to look at a wire transfer and move funds to secure the deal by tomorrow. She hesitated. That's when I did something I'd put off because mothers put off hard things until they can't. I put the receipts, the photos, the messages, and James' notes on the kitchen table. I sat across from her holding my tea like a little country. Don't touch the accounts, I said. Not $1. Not until you've slept, and not until we've seen a lawyer. She looked at me with the fierce, fracturing love you get when you try to hold a weather system steady. What if he's right? She whispered. What if this is our chance? And her voice broke. He says it's for the baby. He's using the baby as a lever, I said. He's a man whose favorite tool is gravity. Make someone fall, then charge admission. Samantha started to shake. Anxiety cuts through muscles like someone carving a root. She clutched the phone and then dropped it. I can't think, she said. I can't think and I can't lose this. What if I'm a bad mother because I'm weak? You're not weak, I told her. You're pregnant, which is not a state of weakness but of vulnerability. Biology and compassion stacked together. That makes you a target for men who think vulnerability is currency. She cried in my arms then, not for the money and not only for the dog, but for having her calm pulled like a rug from underneath her. Mom, she said through tears, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't want to be this mess. You're not a mess, I said. You're a woman who was betrayed. That's not your fault. We sat like that for a long while, and while we sat, I considered the wider war. Ethan was not only an unfaithful husband, he was moving pieces on a board he'd built to look like a game. He wanted to isolate Samantha, make her doubt her mind, and then take her calm and her family's assets in one tidy sweep. I could see it now as clearly as a diagram. Gaslight, destabilize, extract. When I asked Thomas to come over and look at the receipts, his face went through 2 stages: puzzled concern and then a kind of stubborn denial, the emotional contortion men make when their affection is on trial. He leafed through the notes and the receipts and then said quietly, it's circumstantial. Isn't everything circumstantial until it's not? I asked. He's in the car talking about making me insane. He's giving your daughter tea. He's moved the dog and now he's asking for money. Thomas's jaw tightened. You're asking me to distrust a man who's been like a son to me. Rosie, what if he isn't? I demanded. What if he's wearing a suit so nicely tailored we think it was made of his soul? He stood and walked to the window, where he kept his distance and pretended to look at the skyline to avoid admitting what he feared. If you want me to act, show me proof that he's done something criminal. Proof. The awful word. We had receipts and messages and a dog with muddy paws and the video of the car conversation. What had I been thinking? I had that video. I had it on a voice memo, raw and unsent, because the law's line between private conversation and public evidence can be tricky. James had listened and said softly, it's damning, but he'll call it staged. So I did the hard mother thing. I cornered the one place my husband could not pretend he couldn't see his own heart. I sat with Thomas at dinner that night, set the video on the table like an accusation on a plate, and said, listen. He listened. There is a particular sound that comes when a man hears his own child being called a profiteer, and it is not pretty. Thomas's face went through a dozen explanations, and then he turned it off. If this is a setup, he began. It's not, I said. It's not a setup. It's a plan. He stared at me then with a look that had elements of grief, bewilderment, and a man who realized his own child might be a stranger. Why would he do this? He asked. For power, I said simply. For money. For the satisfaction of owning another person's choices. Men like him are greedy for control. He sat back, rocked on his heels, and I could see the math of it spinning in his head. He loved Ethan. He'd been impressed by him since the first meeting. That's the thing about predators who choose families. They pick people who want to be impressed. The next morning, something snapped, maybe the strain of the receipts like a taut line, maybe the worry in Samantha's face. She called me frantic. Her breathing was all short, quick sentences. I'm lightheaded, she said. The monitors, they want me in now. I can't, Mom. I can't. The contractions. I told her to go to the hospital. I told her to call me from the car. I told her to breathe like I'd taught her when she was small and had panic attacks in the school auditorium. On the ride there, her voice got thinner and thinner. The OB told us the baby needed out. The stress had complicated things and the doctors wanted to act. They wheeled her into an OR that smelled like bleach and determination. I sat in the waiting room and held the hotel photo, the receipts, the message threads, and the memory of a voice on a car recording. When the doctor came out, he told me they'd done everything they could. The baby had come earlier than planned, but both mother and infant were stable. We'll watch them, he said. Premature, but not catastrophic. Samantha wanted to blame me before she even had words for the baby. This is your fault, she whispered when I finally saw her, still lucent with drugs and the aftershock of delivery. If you hadn't said those things, maybe I wouldn't have been so stressed. I wanted to tell her the truth, that stress was not an idea she could have avoided if she'd been less honest. That sometimes telling the truth is the only way to keep someone alive. Instead, I let her have the anger. Mothers have to hold so many things, and sometimes they must also be the pillow under the blows. When I walked out of that hospital room into the corridor, the world seemed to have shifted a centimeter off its axis. Family had become a fragile thing that can be poked and made to fray. Samantha's baby had arrived early, and the person who'd engineered the shove, the man who wanted to own our house and our company and perhaps our minds, was still out there, loose and smiling. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table and spread out everything we had: photos, receipts, messages, James' notes, Jack's observations. I felt every syllable in my body, the cost of being right signed in small print. I am used to bearing costs. I am not used to being accused of causing what I was trying to prevent. They would call me hysterical in the days to come. They would call me overprotective, meddlesome, an old woman with an old woman's instincts. They would not call Ethan names they deserved until the world scales, the banks, the lawyers, the men who decide who is sane enough to manage money tilted in a direction I could show them in ink and pixels. But for that night, with Teddy asleep at my feet and the city outside the window blinking like it had nowhere to be rushed, I made one small vow: if Ethan wanted to destroy our family from the inside, he would have to do it over my dead body, and I meant that literally. Men like him plan on people being flexible. They forget that some of us have had our spines tempered by winters and betrayals and still stand. I turned off the lights and wrapped my hands around a mug that no longer burned but only steadied, and I planned the next moves: a lawyer consult in the morning, a discreet background check on Halvorsen, and a press the button moment where Thomas could no longer pretend the facts were stories. What I did not realize then was how quickly the world could isolate you when you were loud with truth. By morning, the first edges of that isolation would begin to show. When morning came, it came gray, not gentle gray, but the kind that hangs over a city like a warning. I woke before dawn, brewed coffee strong enough to make my pulse remember its duties, and stood by the kitchen window watching the fog roll over the Hudson like a slow-moving army. Teddy stirred at my feet. The baby, 2 days old, was in an incubator, and Samantha was somewhere between exhausted and unreachable. My husband slept in the guest room. He claimed it was to let me rest, but I knew the real reason. It's easier to question a woman when you don't have to look at her every morning. The first call came from Thomas. "Rosie," he began carefully, as though he were talking to a client with a complaint he hoped would dissolve. "Ethan's been by the hospital. He's with Samantha. She needs calm right now. Please don't visit today." That please was polished. The kind of please that hides the word don't. "She needs to see her mother," I said. "She just had a premature baby." "I know, sweetheart, but she's upset with you. You've been intense lately. She needs rest." "Intense?" I repeated, the word curling like smoke in my mouth. "Thomas, your daughter almost had a breakdown because that boy was feeding her hallucinogenic herbs. He's gaslighting her to steal money. And now you think I'm the problem because I'm louder than your comfort zone." He sighed. "Rosie, listen to yourself. Hallucinogenic tea? Do you hear how that sounds? Maybe you need rest too." It wasn't the first time in my life a man suggested I was tired when what I was furious. "Fine," I said, "because sometimes surrender is just camouflage. I'll rest. You take care of her, and keep your wallet locked." I hung up before he could reply. When men start speaking softly, they've already decided you're the noise. By noon, Lillian was in my kitchen again, armed with a laptop, a dozen muffins, and her unfiltered sense of purpose. "You look like a general who's been left off her own battlefield," she said. "I've been benched," I answered. "Apparently I'm overreacting. My son-in-law's poisoning my daughter, but I'm overreacting." She opened her laptop like a sword. "Then let's react productively. If the family won't listen, we'll find someone who will." James had already sent updates. He'd dug up Ethan's past, 2 engagements in different states, both ending with financial discrepancies and women who moved away quietly, nursing the kind of shame people mistake for privacy. One had filed a police report that never made it to trial. The other had a sealed restraining order. But the most chilling detail came from a small-town newspaper clipping James found. It was a 1-paragraph blip buried under local news. "Businesswoman loses fortune after husband's disappearance. Police say no foul play suspected." The husband's name was different. The face was not. Ethan had been Ryan Maddox then. Same grin, same hollow eyes. I stared at the printout and thought of my daughter lying in that hospital bed, thinking she was safe because her husband was holding her hand. "James says he'll move carefully," Lillian told me. "If we push too fast, Ethan bolts. If we wait too long, He drains accounts. You're the one who knows his rhythms best, Rosie. What's his next move? I thought about it. He'd charm Thomas. He'd present himself as the dutiful father, the one who had saved Samantha from my hysteria. Then he'd use that pity to access the family accounts, playing savior while siphoning the fortune. It was an old con dressed up in new manners. He'll go for sympathy, I said finally. And then for signatures, Lillian nodded. Then we'll give him what he wants until he signs his own noose. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Samantha's face in that hospital room, the tubes, the light, the way her fingers twitched when she dreamed. The baby, whom they'd named Henry, was stable, tiny but fierce, like he'd inherited my stubbornness through osmosis. Around 2 a.m., the house phone rang. Nobody decent calls at 2 a.m., I answered. Roselyn, the voice said, you should rest. It was him. Ethan. My throat tightened. You have some nerve calling me. He chuckled, a calm, self-satisfied sound that made my skin crawl. I'm just worried about you. You've been through so much. Seeing things, misinterpreting. Thomas told me you've been distraught. Don't you dare talk to me like I'm an invalid, I snapped. I know what you've done. Oh, Rosie, he said, almost pitying. Everyone knows stress can cause confusion at your age. Grief, hormonal shifts, loneliness, it happens. Maybe take a break. A little retreat, maybe? You'd feel better. My hand tightened on the receiver until my knuckles ached. You listen to me, you smug parasite. You think you can twist the truth until it screams. But I have your number. I've got people watching. The police know. You're running out of tricks. Silence. Then softly, you have no idea what I'm capable of. The line went dead. I stood there, shaking not from fear, but from the kind of rage that makes your pulse feel like an earthquake. I dialed Jack. He answered on the second ring. Rosie? He called me. Jack's voice sharpened. He's escalating. That means he's nervous. Good. Good. Means we're close. Just hold your ground. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with Teddy at my feet, a bat under my armchair, and a bottle of scotch that hadn't been opened since Thomas retired. I didn't drink it. I just liked knowing it was mine. By the next afternoon, things began to unravel in public. Thomas called again, this time with that measured disappointment fathers reserve for teenagers. Rosie, he said, Ethan told me about your call last night. He says you threatened him. I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. Oh, for good's sake, he's turning you too? I'm not turned, Thomas said. I'm worried. You're seeing conspiracies everywhere. You need help, Rosie. Real help. I felt something in my chest go cold and smooth, like marble. You think I'm losing my mind. I think you're under stress. Maybe see someone. For Samantha's sake. You're suggesting therapy because a con man told you to. He sighed again. You're not the woman I married when you talk like this. No, I said. I'm the woman who sees through your golden boy. You just don't like the view. We didn't speak again for 3 days. On the 4th day, Samantha was discharged from the hospital. Ethan brought her home to their house in Queens, and I wasn't invited. Lillian drove by anyway and saw him unloading the car, arm draped around Samantha's shoulders like ownership. Inside, my daughter looked fragile, but she smiled when neighbors waved. That's how abusers survive, they smile in daylight. Lillian called me from her car, whispering, he's playing family. She's barely walking, and he's taking pictures for the gram. Caption says home with my loves. Rosie, it's revolting. Let him play, I said through clenched teeth. We'll give him his stage. But I'm writing the ending. That night, Jack and James came to my apartment with news. We got a hit on Halvorsen, James said, setting down a folder. He's been in touch with Ethan. Texts, calls, even a money transfer. Your son-in-law paid him. My blood went ice cold. For what? To show up, James said grimly. To scare you. Maybe even to appear to Samantha. He wanted to make you look delusional, said you were haunted by the past. Classic setup. So that was it. The bastard wasn't just stealing. He was staging a breakdown for me. If he could convince Thomas and Samantha I'd lost my mind, he'd have full control of the money, the company, and, God help me, the baby's future. Then we have to catch him, I said. In the act, no more hints, no more whispers. Proof so big even Thomas can't deny it. Jack smiled the way only brothers do when they smell a good fight. I've got an idea. We built our trap like artisans. James planted a recording device in the nursery of Samantha's house disguised as a white noise machine Ethan himself had bought online. It would catch everything. Jack followed Ethan for 2 days, logging his meetings. He spent a surprising amount of time near a storage unit on the west side, which we suspected was his vault, his hidden stash of forged documents and burner phones. Meanwhile, I played my part. I called Ethan, voice soft, apologetic. You were right, I told him. I've been anxious. I might have overreacted. Maybe we could talk? I just want to make peace for Samantha's sake. He hesitated, then purred. Of course, Rosie. Let's meet. Tomorrow morning? Coffee at the Belgrave? The same hotel where it had all started. Oh, the irony, life really does have a sense of theater. Perfect, I said sweetly. I'll be there. When I hung up, Lillian let out a low whistle. You're walking into the lion's den. No, I said. I'm bringing a match to the haystack. The next morning, I dressed deliberately, navy suit, pearls, the same red lipstick that makes men mistake me for harmless. I pinned my hair like armor and walked into the Belgrave with the same heels I'd worn the night I first caught him. History, I've learned, repeats itself until you interrupt it. Ethan was already there, seated at a corner table, playing the part of the devoted son-in-law. He stood when I approached, smiling like a man rehearsing remorse. Rosie, he said warmly, you look radiant. I sat, placed my bag beside me where the microphone inside could catch every syllable, and folded my hands. You said you wanted peace. I do, he said. We've had misunderstandings. You've been under pressure. I understand. How generous, I said. You understand everything except guilt. He smiled thinly. I forgive easily. Then forgive this, I said. We know about Halvorsen, about the texts, about the money transfers. You tried to make me look insane. His smile didn't break. Rosie, that's quite an accusation. Maybe you should talk to someone I can recommend. Stop. I leaned forward, my voice ablade. You've been recorded, Ethan. In your car, in your house. You said you'd fooled us all, that you'd ruin this family. You've poisoned my daughter and nearly killed your child. And when this is over, you'll wish the police got to you before I do. For the first time, he blinked. You're bluffing. Try me. He leaned back, feigning calm, but his knuckles went white on the coffee cup. You think you've won something, he said softly. But your husband doesn't believe you. Your daughter hates you. When they commit you, I'll make sure they thank me for saving you from yourself. He stood and left, his cologne trailing behind him like arrogance. I sat there, trembling, and pressed the button on my recorder. The light blinked red. Every word had been captured. I smiled for the first time in weeks, because the game had changed. Now it was my move. I walked out of that hotel like a woman who'd just crawled out of a grave she'd dug for somebody else. The recorder in my purse was warm from how tightly I'd been gripping it, as if the words inside were still alive, his words, not mine, breathing like proof. Outside, New York had the nerve to be beautiful. The fog had lifted, replaced by the kind of sharp winter sunlight that makes even the most dishonest things look honest for a moment. I hailed a cab, my heels clicking against the marble like punctuation marks. The driver asked, "Where to, ma'am, Justice?" I said again, and smiled. "But the precinct will do." James met me 2 blocks from the station in an unmarked car, the way he prefers. He was careful. Cops who've worked long enough learn that truth is like glass. Handle it wrong, and it cuts you first. I handed him the recorder and the backup flash drive I'd made that morning. "You'll find enough on there to make a saint swear," I said. He nodded. "I'll log it, but I need to warn you, recordings without consent get messy. We'll use them for context, not court. What I can use is the language, those threats about having you committed, the references to money and Halvorsen. That's criminal conspiracy territory." "That's fine," I said. "I don't need a courtroom yet. I just need a witness who isn't gaslit." He smiled faintly. "You've got one." The next 48 hours were an education in patience. While James worked the formal angle, Jack worked the informal one, shadowing Ethan from a distance. He followed him to that storage unit, just as we'd guessed. Inside, Ethan had documents, forged loan papers with my daughter's forged signature, a transfer authorization with Thomas's name typed neatly in, and a few blank checks, each with a different version of his handwriting practice. We didn't touch anything. Jack took photographs, but one folder in particular froze him. It was labeled Rosie Case File. Inside were notes Ethan had clearly been compiling for months, clippings, screenshots of my Facebook posts, even a forged email from me to an imaginary psychic. The kind of things that, strung together, could convince any court or doctor that I was paranoid, unstable, in need of professional care. He'd been building my insanity like an architect. When Jack sent me those photos, I had to sit down. There's a special kind of nausea that comes when you see yourself framed in someone else's madness. He's trying to erase me, I whispered. Lillian looked over my shoulder. Then we'll make you unerasable. Thomas, meanwhile, was sliding deeper into Ethan's orbit. He'd gone to visit Samantha and the baby, and Ethan made sure to play the part, cradling Henry with a tender smile, calling Thomas Dad, thanking him for keeping an open heart while Rosie sorts herself out. Thomas called me that night. His voice was kind, but distant, the way people talk to someone they've already half buried. Rosie, he said, I think you should see someone. I'm worried. You're making people nervous. I wanted to scream. He's making me disappear in front of you. But instead I said, do you remember when we first got married and your mother hated me? How she said I was too loud, too stubborn, too much. He sighed. Rosie, I was right about her. I'm right about him. And you can either believe me now or apologize later. But by God, Thomas, when you do, don't expect me to be gracious. He was quiet for a long time before he said, you're scaring me. Good, I said, and hung up. 2 nights later, the game turned physical. I came home from Lillian's place to find my apartment door slightly ajar. Inside, everything looked normal except for the teacup on the counter. It was mine, but it wasn't where I'd left it. The liquid inside smelled faintly herbal. He'd been there. I didn't call 911. I called Jack. He arrived with the efficiency of blood TIs and military habits. He swept the place, found nothing, then crouched by the cup, sniffed it, and said, don't touch it. We had it tested through one of James's lab contacts. The results came back the next day. Traces of scopolamine, hallucinogenic in small doses, incapacitating in higher ones. The same chemical found in certain relaxation teas. Ethan wasn't just trying to ruin my reputation. He was trying to alter my reality. That realization lit a fire under all of us. James put surveillance on Ethan's car. Jack camped near Samantha's house, blending in with the work crews on the block. I stayed put, but I wrote pages and pages of what had happened, dated and signed. Every strange event, every conversation, every manipulation. If he wanted to make me look insane, he'd have to do it against a backdrop of perfect written clarity. 3 days later, the first break came. James called. Voice electric. We've got him. He met with Halvorsen this morning in a diner near Queens Boulevard. We recorded the conversation. He paid him cash and told him, quote, your entrance is in today's. Make sure she sees you first. I almost dropped the phone. Sees him? Where? We don't know yet, but it's soon. And it's going to be big. I knew in my bones what big meant. He wanted to push me over the edge publicly. A scene, something dramatic enough to confirm his story that I was unraveling. Maybe at Samantha's house, maybe at the hospital. He'd arranged for Halvorsen to appear, make me panic, make me lash out in front of witnesses. But this time, we'd be waiting. The next day was deceptively quiet. I spent it with Lillian, feigning calm. We baked ginger cookies, something grounding about the act of mixing butter and rage. Jack checked in from his post, bored but vigilant. James told us they had backup in unmarked cars in the area. Then, at 5:13 p.m., my phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. Rosie, Sam's invited you for dinner. She wants peace. Please don't bring up the past. Just come be family. PM. The trap had been baited. I replied simply, wouldn't miss it. When I arrived, the house looked to perfect. Candles, soft music, the kind of domestic scene that photographs well. Samantha greeted me at the door, tired, thin, but smiling in that way people do when they're desperate for a version of normal. Hi, Mom, she said. Let's not fight tonight, okay? I kissed her cheek and whispered, okay. Ethan appeared from the kitchen, sleeves rolled, apron on, playing doting husband. Rosie, he said warmly, you look beautiful. Don't I always? I said. We ate. We talked about Henry's weight, about the doctor's optimism, about the weather. Beneath the conversation ran a current so taut it could have sliced bread. And then at exactly 7:45 the doorbell rang. Ethan excused himself to answer. When he opened it, I heard the voice before I saw the face. Halvorsen, older, grayer, but the same cruel smirk that had haunted my daughter's adolescence. He stepped into the doorway like a ghost that had been practicing an entrance. Samantha froze. I stood slowly. What the hell is he doing here? Halvorsen smiled, rehearsed. Rosie, he said, as if we were old friends. Long time. Ethan invited me. Thought we could bury the hatchet. My pulse roared in my ears. You get out of this house. Ethan moved quickly, stepping between us, palms raised like peace. Rosie, calm down. He just wants to talk. Talk? My voice cracked like thunder. You bring him here? To my daughter? After what he did? Samantha's face went white. Mom, please. Ethan put an arm around her. It's okay, love. Your mom's been under a lot of stress. That's when I saw the phone in his other hand recording. He wanted me to lose it on camera. Oh, you clever little devil, I said quietly. You really think you're going to film me breaking down? He smiled that same shark smile. No, Rosie. I'm going to film you attacking an innocent man. Then I'll call for help. We'll get you the treatment you need. But before I could reply, the front door burst open. Jack first, then James, both with the kind of timing only siblings and cops possess. Don't move, James barked. Police. Ethan Cole, also known as Ryan Maddox, you're under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and criminal conspiracy. Ethan turned pale, eyes flicking from me to the badge. What? How? Jack held up his phone. We've got your diner conversation, sweetheart, and your storage unit. You built a whole scrapbook on how to fake my sister's insanity. Shame it's exhibit. And now, Halvorsen tried to slip out the back, but 2 officers were already there. He didn't resist. Men like him rarely do once the performance ends. Ethan's mask cracked. You don't understand. This is all her idea. She's framing me. She's been obsessed. James snapped cuffs on him. You should have rehearsed that story better. It's all on tape. I watched as they led him out, his head bent, his confidence leaking onto the floor like cheap cologne. Samantha sank into a chair, face wet with shock. Mom, she whispered. I don't. What? I sat beside her and took her hand. You don't have to understand tonight, I said softly. Just know I wasn't crazy. I was right. She nodded slowly, eyes wide and trembling. He really would have ruined us. He almost did, I said. But I've spent 61 years learning how to spot men who smile while holding matches. The police cars left. Halvorsen disappeared back into whatever purgatory old villains go to. Jack stayed, pouring me a small whiskey. Lillian texted one word, victory. Thomas arrived an hour later, face ashen. Rosie, he said hoarsely. I heard. God. Rosie, I'm sorry. I looked at him for a long moment before saying, you don't owe me an apology, Thomas. You owe me a steak dinner and the rest of your life not doubting me again. He laughed through tears. Deal. That night, after everyone was gone and the baby was sleeping soundly, I stood by the window watching the red and blue lights fade down the street. The city was quiet again. My heart wasn't. I thought of every woman who's ever been told she's imagining things, every mother made to doubt her instincts, every truth dismissed as hysteria. Then I poured myself a small drink, lifted it toward the window, and whispered, to every woman who refuses to go quietly. Teddy barked once, as if seconding the toast. But the story wasn't quite over yet, because the cleanup after a storm is often where the real revelations wash up. And in the days that followed, I would learn that Ethan's rot ran deeper than even I had guessed. They call it the aftermath, as if life were a tidy photograph you can file away once the villain is handcuffed. But aftermaths are messy things. They hang around, they drip into cracks, they test whether your victory was real or just luck wearing heels. When the police cars left that night, the silence was thick enough to lean on. Samantha had fallen asleep in the nursery chair, the baby swaddled against her chest. I stood over them for a long time, watching her face shift between exhaustion and something else, grief, maybe, for the version of her life she'd just lost. I'd expected triumph to feel cleaner. It didn't. It felt like standing on a battlefield after the smoke clears, alive, yes, but aware that the landscape has changed forever. Thomas came up behind me, slower now, humble in a way I'd almost forgotten he could be. He touched my shoulder and said, you were right, Rosie, about everything. I didn't turn around. That's a phrase you might get used to. He gave a short, guilty laugh, then said, the police told me what they found, how deep this thing went. The forged papers, the shell accounts. My God, if I hadn't been loud, I said, we'd be broke, and our daughter would be living in a hospital bed calling herself the problem. He nodded. I'll never doubt you again. Good, I said, finally turning to him. Because I'm not sure I have the patience to save you twice. We stood there, 2 people who had built a whole life on quiet faith, suddenly realizing that faith alone isn't worth much without a spine attached. The next morning, the papers had it. Business heir arrested in multi-state fraud scheme. They didn't say my name, which suited me fine. I'd had enough headlines in my life. Anonymity is the real luxury after 60. Lillian showed up before noon, waving the paper like a trophy. You, my dear, are the talk of every book club in Manhattan, she said, plopping down on my couch. Half of them think you're crazy. The other half think you're magnificent. Split down the middle, I said. That's how I know I did it right. She laughed and handed me a muffin. So what now? Now, I said, I rest. Then I rebuild. But the word rest has never sat comfortably in my mouth. By evening, I was already making lists, lawyers to call, accounts to freeze, statements to file. Thomas tried to take the pen from my hand. You've done enough, he said gently. I'll decide when I've done enough, I replied. Not the world, not the police, and certainly not a man who ignored me until I screamed. He nodded, wisely retreating to make tea. 2 days later, James stopped by with an update. Ethan had folded faster than expected. Once confronted with the recordings and the physical evidence from his storage unit, he'd started talking a flood of confessions that painted him not as a criminal mastermind but as a desperate gambler who'd been running this marriage con for years. He's going away for a long time, James said. And Hal Vorson, well, he's facing new charges. You won't have to see either of them again. Good, I said. Let them both rot somewhere with bad lighting. James smiled. You're something else, Rosie. I've been called worse, I said. Usually by men who underestimated me. He chuckled. I might use that line at work. Just pay me royalties, I said, and he laughed his way out the door. Samantha came home a week later, thinner, quieter, but freer. Healing is strange, it doesn't come in bursts but in small permissions. She started by taking walks with Teddy, then by holding the baby without flinching, then by letting herself laugh at things that weren't jokes. One evening, she sat across from me at my kitchen table, a cup of herbal tea between us from a box I had personally inspected. She looked at me a long time before speaking. Mom, she said softly, I'm sorry. I didn't believe you. You weren't supposed to, I said. That's how good liars work, they make doubt look polite. She blinked back tears. How did you know? Because I've met his kind before, I said. When you've lived long enough, you learn to read men the way you read weather. Their storms always start with charm. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I want to be like you someday. I smiled. No, sweetheart. Be better. Be kind. But never compliant. And if anyone ever tells you you're crazy, make sure you have a camera running. She laughed, then a real, breaking laugh that filled the kitchen with something like resurrection. Weeks passed. The holidays arrived, quiet and unceremonious. The city outside glowed, pretending the world was soft again. We celebrated Christmas in the same house where Ethan had plotted our undoing. I refused to let him steal another space from us. Jack brought a tree that leaned slightly to the left, claiming it had character. Lillian came with too many pies and too much champagne. Thomas hung the lights crookedly, muttering about how men over 60 shouldn't be trusted with ladders, and Samantha, holding baby Henry, watched us all with that tentative peace of someone relearning safety. When midnight came, I stepped onto the balcony with my glass of champagne and looked out at the city. The fog was gone. The air was clean, the kind that hurts your lungs a little because it's honest. Lillian joined me. So, she said, what's next for our heroine? Write a book? Open a detective agency? Neither, I said. I'm thinking about teaching a class. Self-defense for women who are tired of being polite. She laughed so hard she almost dropped her glass. You'd sell out every seat. I'd make it a workshop, I continued. Lesson 1. Trust your gut. Lesson 2. Keep receipts. Lesson 3. If they call you crazy, smile and start recording. She clinked her glass against mine. To Roselyn, the woman who turned betrayal into an art form. To all of us, I said. Every woman who ever had to scream to be believed. After the new year, I visited the courthouse for Ethan's arraignment. I didn't have to go, but closure is a dish best served face to face. He looked smaller in a suit that no longer fit, wrists cuffed, eyes darting for someone to charm. When he saw me in the back row, he straightened, tried to smile. I smiled back, slow, deliberate, and utterly unafraid. He mouthed something I couldn't hear. I didn't need to. Some words have no power left once they hit the air. When the judge denied bail, I felt a quiet click inside me, like a door finally locking behind a burglar. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered, microphones hungry. One asked, Mrs. Hale, do you have a comment? I paused, adjusted my scarf, and said, yes. Believe women the first time. Then I walked right past them. Life after drama is quieter but sharper. I learned to trust my peace the way soldiers trust the quiet after gunfire cautiously. I still walk the dog every morning, still bake too many pies, still talk too loudly for polite company. But I also check the locks twice, keep backups of everything, and trust my instincts even when they sound inconvenient. Thomas has softened in his way. He brings me coffee in bed now, like a penance wrapped in caffeine. "You saved us," he said one morning, sitting at the edge of the bed. "No," I said. "I just remembered who I was before anyone told me to doubt it." Sometimes I catch myself thinking about Ethan, not the man, but the pattern. How many other women he's hurt, how many families nearly undone. And then I think, maybe this is what age is for, not fading quietly, but fighting smarter. Maybe the years don't slow us down. They sharpen our instincts until we can see betrayal coming from 3 rooms away. So I've started something new. A small group, just a handful of women neighbors, friends, daughters. We meet every Wednesday in my living room. We drink coffee, compare stories, teach each other what we've learned the hard way. Lillian calls it Rosie's Resistance, though I prefer the Tuesday Tea Club because it sounds less militant and more grandmotherly until you listen in. We laugh, we plan, we teach each other to survive. Because the truth is this, every woman has a story like mine, even if hers ends differently. And every one of us deserves to be believed before we have to go to war. Tonight, the city hums outside my window, alive and indifferent. The baby is asleep upstairs. The men who doubted me are contrite. The man who tried to ruin me is learning that orange jumpsuits don't pair well with arrogance. I pour myself a glass of wine, sit by the window, and write the last words in this long, unlikely chapter. They wanted to make me the madwoman in the attic, but I burned the attic down and built a study in its place. Then I close my journal, pet Teddy's head, and let the night hold me not as a victim, not as a heroine, but as what I've always been, a woman who refuses to disappear.